So the recording is on. What we're going to talk about today, let's just check everyone can see the screen, and I have my mouse kind of floating around. I promise I won't do that too much. We're going to talk today about what to do when you have your match list and cousins show up and you don't know who they are. For this case, I am using a first cousin example. Some of you may not have any new first cousins who pop up. You might end up with second cousins or third cousins who pop up. And the handout that I sent through email is sort of a methodology of what steps you can use. It's an accumulation of a lot of different places I've been, lectures I've heard, webinars I've watched, books I've read. And so if you're wondering where you can find more resources, probably in the next week or two, I'm going to email around some of the popular resources. I would also just give a plug right now to a summer institute that's coming up that I've been to, and it's called GRIP, G-R-I-P, in Pittsburgh. And if you have a chance to do anything at GRIP, not just DNA, but any kind of course, I've gone 2 years in a row and I thought it was fantastic. It was a great opportunity to learn. So if you need further information about that or you can't find it on Google, let me know. The registration is ongoing. It's already begun. So if there is a wait list, just get on the wait list and hope that they can figure that out. In the past, they've always been able to accommodate the vast majority of those requests. Also, one of the things that I wanted to point out, and we'll go ahead and move to the next slide if I can get it to work. There we go. I'm going to introduce myself just because we're doing the recording in case someone is watching it later and misses it. So here's what you should know about me. I love genealogy, so you are my people. And I do genealogy speaking around the country, and I do my own genealogy. I do not generally help people with their research because I don't feel like that's my skill area, although I do sometimes help people with DNA analysis. But in general, what I like to do is education. So I do a lot of workshops, half-day workshops, full-day workshops, and speaking events and conferences. And I volunteer as the DNA interest group facilitator for this group that I started. I started it last summer, but this is the first meeting. I've been planning and setting up, sites and things like that. And before this, I was actually the DNA interest group facilitator in Columbus, Ohio, for the Franklin County Genealogical and Historical Society. And I did that for almost 3 years and really learned a lot. The best way to learn is to teach. And we'll probably talk about that at other meetings. But, if you really want to know how much you know about something, try to teach it to someone else and you will shortly find out. Most of the lines of my family have been in Ohio for almost 190 years. That sounds like a long time, and it is. So a lot of my research is local, and a lot of my specialization is in Ohio research and Ohio archives. Most of my family lines came through Port of Philadelphia, kind of spread through a couple of different places in Pennsylvania, and ended up in Ohio very shortly after Ohio became a state and into the 1820s. And I work for a company in Dubai. It's called Smart Education. And so that's Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And yes, I've been there a couple of times. And the company that I work for, we write and edit math and science K through 12 textbooks. So I'm the supervising editor there, and I have a team in the US of about 30 people who work for me, and we do writing and editing. And I do that at home and sometimes in my pajamas. So we don't ever do any of our meetings on webcams, so I can get away with a lot. Just some general notes about today. For the presentation, the names and photos of people have been redacted to protect privacy. Be mindful of privacy if you're posting anything in the chat during the recording. I can't look at the chat and look at the presentation mode, so I'll check the chat when we get done. And we do have a responsibility to follow best practices of genetic genealogy. If you aren't familiar with that, you can Google that, genetic genealogy standards or genetic genealogy best practices, and you can find a wealth of information about how we need to try to be as responsible and ethical as we can when we're dealing with not only DNA evidence, but adoption, with health information, with all the different places that this field touches. We need to try to do things as ethically and responsibly as we can. And that is one of the things that throughout today's presentation, I'll talk about those spots where I had ethical and privacy concerns. Some of these dates and ages are relative to 2018 because this story started in the summer of 2018. So some of the screenshots are in real time in 2018. And some of the websites might look different than these. For example, Ancestry's website might look different than this. I just want to let you know it might have new functionality or something that you haven't, doesn't look familiar. Or if you've been around DNA a while, you'll say, oh yeah, I remember when it looked like that. We're going to talk about a tester, and we are using the anonymized tester to talk about this presentation so that everything is anonymous and is private. The tester opened up her match page one day, and this was in the summer of 2018, and she saw people on her list who she normally saw: dad and mom, daughter and son. So most of us, when we open up our match page and we look at our list of all of our matches on Ancestry, see something like this, depending on who we know that's been tested. She also saw her sister and brother, so everyone's kind of in the right spot, and then noticed that there was this mystery first cousin category, and I'm going to use the name Cousin M because in working on this puzzle and trying to solve this mystery, I've actually never spoken to this cousin, and I've never spoken to her, anyone else who showed up on this match list. I've never spoken to. So I have to keep everyone anonymous in the story. So there was 3 known first cousins in the list, and then more beyond that who were unknown to the tester. So let me go back and let's look at that one more time. We have the tester's dad and mom tested. We have the tester's daughter and son tested. Sister and brother are tested. Cousin M is coming in as her first cousin match. And then we have 3 known first cousins who've tested. And then more people who tested that the tester does not know. So how do people appear in the match list? That's generally the first thing that people ask about. Ancestry uses the total amount of shared centimorgans to list the matches. So once Cousin M showed up, she actually outranked those known first cousins as a higher match. And those known first cousins were moved to what was called a first, second cousin combined category. So the known first cousins for many, many years were sitting in that first cousin category for the tester until this new match showed up that was a higher match than the 3 of them. So they're sort of outranked. They're moved to another category. So let's look at the other matches that could be new. So there are a whole list of second cousins who are new and unknown matches to the tester, and the tester doesn't know who these folks are either. So the tester, just in summary, has the following DNA tests. Now you might be saying to yourself, if I want to solve a mystery, how do I organize this? How do I keep track of what I'm finding? We will talk about that a little bit throughout, but whether you're doing this for yourself or you're doing this for someone else, you need to do what's the best way to keep track of it for you. Sometimes people who do a lot of talks on organization, and I do a lot of talks on organization, want to try to convince you to do it their way. Maybe they have color coding and numbering and all these other things, and by the time you figure out what they're talking about, you're thinking, there's no way I can do that. So one thing that I suggest is, if you're going to organize something like this, do it in the same way that you organize other things in your world. So for example, you organize your taxes, you organize your sewing patterns or your recipe cards or something like that. So think about the way that your brain usually works. And most people are visual. So we're going to talk about the visuals that you can do to organize as well. So the tester has the following DNA kits: dad and mom, brother, sister, son and daughter, 3 first cousins who happen to be of dad's sister, and a few unknowns. So that's kind of where the mystery starts. So what do you need to help you solve these kind of questions? Some people need a list. I happen to be a list person. I'm a little bit on the OCD spectrum, so I have a lot of lists for a lot of things. That isn't necessarily you, but that's one thing that I do, is I keep a list. Some people like spreadsheets. And when you're working with DNA, not necessarily at Ancestry, but if you're working with DNA at some of the other companies that have sites or, where you can download their data. So maybe you're using a tool called GEDmatch, maybe you're using Family Tree Family Finder and downloading aggregate data, or doing the same thing at 23andMe. Some people like to use spreadsheets and then make them their own. So color coding and that sort of thing. And there'll be some future weeks where we talk about how to do that, because that's something that usually it's easier to do if you're watching someone and kind of following along. And so we'll do a couple of meetings about things like spreadsheets and other tools. Some people like diagrams. Probably 80–85% of people are visual. When I first started teaching, I taught middle school and high school for about 6 years before I started teaching at the local community college and then working in publishing. And one thing that was really difficult for me is that I'm an audio learner. I learn by hearing. What I realized quickly as a teacher is that most people learn by seeing, or they learn by a combination of things. So maybe seeing and writing, or listening and writing. So whatever your learning style is, adapt whatever you're doing to fit that, and you'll be a lot more successful. So if you need a list or a spreadsheet or a diagram, do that. Some people like to make trees in software. So let's say, for example, you have an online tree at Ancestry, or you have Family Tree Maker software, and you're thinking, I want to make a tree so I can follow where all these people are and connect them together. If you make your tree online, you want to make sure that it's private and unsearchable, because otherwise your research tree is going to kick hints out for other people. So those hints that you get, those shaky leaves, for lack of a better term, that's Ancestry's term, the shaky leaves will start showing up if you have a searchable and public tree online. And so other people will start to contact you, especially if their information they have in their tree is different than what you're showing in your tree that you're trying to solve a mystery. So that's just something to keep in mind while you're doing this, is you don't really want to tip off hints in other people's trees if it's not a fully researched and fully sourced tree like most of us strive to have. For me, I actually do all of these things depending on what the mystery is and how I'm going to figure it out. And you notice I say how I am going to figure it out, because I'm determined that I'm going to figure it out. And sometimes we'll talk about the timeline of this and how long it might take and those kind of things. But I always start a project assuming that I will figure it out. And with DNA, so far, knock on wood, I've been successful in that. But it is something that a lot of people are intimidated by. And so part of today is to try to talk you into at least believing in yourself maybe a little more than you do right now. So for me, I do lists and spreadsheets and diagrams, and I make trees in software, but I also start a research report to keep me organized and focused. And for those of you not familiar with the research report, I'm actually going to do a topic one of these months. I'll do a topic on research reports. For me, they're critical to keeping everything together that I work on, the sequence, the sources, where I found things, what I was doing. And in DNA analysis in particular, it's important to have not only a running dialogue to yourself of where you've been, but also a running list of your assumptions and your hypotheses and your conclusions. Because I will tell you, having done this for a few years now, your hypotheses might change. You'll start the process thinking, well, I'm pretty sure that cousin M is this relationship, this type of DNA match, and then pretty soon you have to go back and reevaluate. So it really helps to have everything in a running commentary, a running dialogue to yourself. So I do that every single time I start a new mystery, as I start a new notepad where I'm writing things down. If I'm working with someone else on the mystery, and that happens a lot in DNA, that you're working with someone else, it didn't happen in this case. In this case, I was working with only one person at the very, very end after I thought I had figured it out. But if you're working with someone in the beginning, you might want to have this running dialogue or some kind of communication between you that's digital format. But for me, I often start just with a notepad, old school. So some people need the tree. They need to actually see the visual. So what I have here is the visual that shows the tester, and I think you can see my mouse here. The tester, and she has her father and mother's kits. She has her brother and sister's kits. She has her children, boys, girl kits. She also has the kits, or at least access to them, of these 3 first cousins. So sometimes it helps to draw just a little rudimentary tree and figure out which kits are the kits of the known people. So that's something that I often do when I'm working on a project. And then I expand this to how do all these other people fit in. So again, depending on whether you're audio or visual or what your learning style is, sometimes just the act of drawing this out gives me ideas of where I want to look next for DNA matches. It also will tell me if I know who some of the people are in the list. Like for example, these 3 first cousins, both of their biological parents and grandparents are deceased. So I know that there won't be any further people to test in that line unless there are children there that I'm not aware of. So those are the kind of things that can help you make some decisions and kind of pivot to in a way that might help your research a little bit more. So there are important things to remember. Just like regular genealogical pursuits, people test in groups. If a match comes in around the same time, I look at families who might have all tested together. So when I was looking at this list for this tester in the summer of 2018, I was looking for who is it that may have tested at the same time as this person, and who are all the other people whose results might be showing up. You also might have one guinea pig match and then a group of people who show up later. So sometimes a person in a family will take a DNA test, go back, report back to the family, and then say, hey, look what I found. And then a whole lot of other people test within a family. So just like in genealogy, where we're talking about people moving in groups, going to church or to temple in groups, migrating in groups, living in groups, we also have people DNA testing in groups. So look at all the other matches that come in around the same time and start to think about whether or not those could be a family group. So Ancestry will tell you some of the possible relationships for this cousin M. So first cousins could, that category could be you sharing a grandparent with someone. So what I have on screen, this is a little bit different than what you'll see there now, but from you to your parent to grandparent and or uncle to first cousin is it what's called a degree 4 relationship. If you think about it like a board game, you're just hopping 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're at first cousin. But there are other relationships that have that same relative amount of DNA, roughly about 12.5% of DNA. So Ancestry will also tell you that. In this screen, what happens is you scroll down and you see that there's also great nephew or niece. So from the tester to the parent, to the brother or sister, niece or nephew, to great niece or nephew. So that's also a degree 4 relationship, also the same percentage of DNA, roughly the same percentage. The same is true of great-great-grandparents. So from you to your parent, grand, great-grand, and great-great-grand is a degree 4 relationship. Now, most of the people who've tested who are on this call are not going to have, maybe not even grandparents or great-grandparents, certainly not great-great-grandparents who are testing. So that's the kind of logic that we're going to apply to try to solve the problem. So what can I find out about Mystery Cousin M? I always talk about how we want to sleuth but not stalk. And when I say that, what I mean is I use the tools that are available to me, the messaging things in Ancestry. I use anything that I can use online to kind of track people down, and we'll talk about some of those. But I'm not actually stalking people. I'm not mailing them letters. I'm not showing up at their door. I'm not finding them and seeking them out on Facebook or Instagram or some other method. So I'm using the genealogy tools that we have, and I'm not going beyond that. Now, I do know that some people feel differently about that, and that's okay. So that's something that's a personal decision. For me, I sleuth, not stalk. So you're not going to find me hunting people down on Facebook and trying to friend them and that sort of thing. So what can I find out about Cousin M, excuse me, just by looking at her profile on Ancestry? I can tell that she last logged in April of 2018 when I did this screenshot. When I go there today to look at it, it's the same date. So she is long gone. And she actually has no family tree, at least in 2018 when I did this screenshot. But what I realized was, and I think it's on the next screen, that she actually does have a tree. And she had a public tree. She just had not linked her DNA to it. So what happens now if you go to Ancestry's site is you will see that cousin, and then you will see unlinked tree and know to go to their page to find that. So it will either show the tree is linked to it or it will tell you it's unlinked. Before you had to look up their membership and see if they had logged in to see what their tree status was. I did see on here that there is some information about last logged in, the relationship, you can view the match and that sort of thing. So, and I want you to know, those are really small. Can you see that she has 7 people in her tree? No records, 2 photos. These are the 2 photos right here. I've got them redacted. They actually happen to be 2 headstone photos. 7 people in her tree. So a lot of people would say, well, what good is that? There's 7 people in her tree. Well, I'll tell you what good that is. That's probably pretty good gold right there. Because unless she's adopted and has her adoptive parents in her tree, those are likely the 7 people that she thinks are her parents and grandparents. So that's going to be very helpful, particularly for first cousin match, because it could be that she is a true first cousin of the tester. And so that would mean a shared grandparent. So even though there's 7 people in the tree and we still need to evaluate that and think about it, that could be the really a good clue to who this cousin M is. So what else can we find out about cousin M? So you can message the matches in the DNA company tool. So again, I went through and I looked at everyone who was new on the list who looked like there might be some relationship there, common name, common testing time period, and I just started messaging all of them. Hey, I'm Kelly. I'd like to help solve a mystery for a tester. What do you know? That sort of thing. So just a general thing. The kind of messages that I get sometimes that I get a little bit annoyed with because there's not a lot of information in them. I check social media for details, photos, age, information. Again, I've kind of drawn a line for myself where I'm not reaching out in social media, but I certainly do use that to see if I can find details, photos, age, and that sort of thing. It's very common for people to have Facebook pages, Instagram, Twitter, something like that, LinkedIn, which is a professional site for work. So there are a lot of different places you can find out information. But again, for me, I'm not messaging people on those sites. I'm keeping my messages at Ancestry. I also check Zava Search, and this is in your handout. Zava Search is like one big world-wide tracker of people, and it goes off of public records a lot. So addresses and ages and names and things like that. You can narrow it by state, by city, that sort of thing. But I love Zava Search, and I have found quite a few people using that. I also check usernames. So let's say on Ancestry, someone is using a particular username. And a common one that I use is redheaded frog. And I'm redhead and my dad used to call me Frog. So redheaded frog is in a lot of my email address stuff, some of my usernames. And so I use that a lot, and many people use the same username over and over. So whatever username they might have on Ancestry, you might want to Google that and see what else pops up, because you can pretty soon figure out from usernames who someone could be, or at least some hints. Now remember, there are privacy issues and ethical concerns all along this roadmap. If you're working with someone who's adopted and looking for a bio parent, bio grandparent, unknown parentage event, misattributed parentage, any of those kind of things, you want to always kind of press pause, think for a few minutes. Don't make a sudden decision to start emailing or contacting. Really think about, okay, if this is true, if my hypothesis is true, then what ramification might that have for another person? I do think we have an obligation to be kind. And I also think that we have an obligation to consider that what we may discover might be something that's been hidden for a long time for a number of reasons. Most of us assume that a misattributed parentage was an affair, but it could be a rape. It could be any number of things, sperm donation, egg donation, any number of things that people were assuming throughout the years would be private. I'm sure that all the sperm donors from many, many years ago in the 70s and early 80s were thinking that no one would ever know that. So there are things that we can find out through DNA testing, and we just need to be sensitive to other people. Whenever someone does not correspond with me, that doesn't deter me, but I see that as either evidence that they're not logged in, or they're not that interested, or maybe they just did the test for the ethnicity and they're just kind of like a one and done. They wanted the ethnicity report and then they leave. But sometimes people don't correspond because they just don't want to, and that's okay. So what did I find by sleuthing and not stalking cousin M? I found out that she has a very unusual name. Now that makes things a little bit easier, because someone with an unusual name, you can Google a little easier, you can go on Facebook a little bit easier. She had a Facebook page with one photo and just a few posts. So she was on Facebook about as much as she was on Ancestry's site. So that wasn't very helpful, except that that did leave me with a photo and a little bit of information. She lived in Tennessee under a second name, which is probably her first marriage, I'm guessing, hypothesizing. And she lived in Washington under a third name, which could also be a second marriage. So, you know, I have a series of surnames here that I'm looking at. Those married names matched some of the surnames of the tester's DNA matches. So way back in the beginning, where we had all those question marks next to all the matches, some of those surnames of the matches that are second cousins and third cousins have shared surnames with cousin M. They either match her birth name, they match what I think is her first married name, or they match her second married name. So I'm already starting to form a family group. Family groups are really important to solving not only genealogy questions, but also genetic genealogy questions. As soon as you start to group people together, you will make a lot of progress quickly. She is 64 years old, and again, this was in 2018. And I did find some obituaries where she was mentioned, announcements, job information, graduations, some things like that. So through sleuthing, I was able to come up with a few things. But that, you know, that's just background information. It wasn't necessarily going to help me solve the mystery right away, but you never know. So how much DNA does cousin M share with the tester? So when I was running this, this actually shows up on screen now. I think shortly after 2018, when I did the screenshot for this, this information shows up now. You don't have to click, but before you had to click on the little information button. So cousin M has 658 centimorgans shared across 25 segments with the tester. So that's what put her in that first cousin category. Remember though, that's just a category. So what I do with that information is I go to the Shared Centimorgan project. We used to have to use a chart for this, but we don't anymore. We have a great tool at dnapainter.com, and the link's in your handout. DNA Painter is a tool that people use to analyze chromosomes and analyze segments of chromosomes that they might have in common with other people. But this particular page of DNA Painter, under the tools, there is a shared centimorgan chart that you can use for free. And you can put in here, either in the first box, it's kind of faded out. I wish that these websites didn't use white screens because it's so hard to do screenshots. But there's a box here for total number of centimorgans for your match, or you can enter down here the percent of match. So let's say you have a test at 23andMe and you want to do the percent match, you can enter it there. And when you do that, what shows up right below it, here's what it looks like filled in. I filled in the 658. And right below it, what highlights are the possible relationships that cousin M has with the tester based on the amount of centimorgans. So let's go back and look at that number, 658, and look at this chart again. 658 is in the range for great-grandparent, in the range for aunt or uncle, first cousins once removed, or first cousin's child. And all these highlighted relationships have the possibility of being the relationship that cousin M is expressing in this family. So the question is, why does Ancestry call it first cousin if it's not your first cousin? Well, that's because it's based on a percentage of centimorgans that you have in common with someone. So if a typical first cousin is somewhere around 12.5% of DNA in common, and a typical first cousin will be in the 860s to 870s range. Well, I guess it says here 874 is a typical first cousin. So when you look at the range right below it, first cousins can have less or more of that. That depends on recombination and a number of different factors. And we'll talk about that in some subsequent meetings. But for what you need to know to solve your mysteries, you need to look at each one of these highlighted areas and say, any of these could be cousin M. First cousin is just the default name that Ancestry uses for the category. So if a first cousin typically shares about 12.5% of DNA, what does the 8.8% mean, the percent of DNA shared? In case you missed it, I'll go back so you can see it. When I put in the amount of centimorgans, the tool generated this number as 8.8. So what does that mean if a typical first cousin is 12.5% and it's only an 8.8% match? We want to look at the range of centimorgans for first cousins in that shared centimorgan project. And these are some of the likely relationships. And all of those are possible. So it could just be on the low end of first cousin relationship. As you work with this more and more, you're going to start recognizing some numbers and patterns. When this is all brand new, the more you write down, the more you internalize, the better. So there is a probability calendar from a calculator, from the DNA Geek, Leah Larkin, and I've included the links in your handout. There are 3 different links that explain how you can use the probability calculator. Sometimes I use this, sometimes I don't. In this case with the tester and cousin M, if you look at, there's a 52% probability that it's one of these relationships, and a 47% probability that it's one of these relationships. That's not really narrowing it down very much. To think that 99% of your probability is within this grayish area here, that doesn't really narrow it down. There are some relationships that will narrow down much more specifically than that. So I usually look at it, but it doesn't really inform my analysis right off the bat. Sometimes it's something I come back to later. The probability calculator is on that shared centimorgan page, DNA Painter. So there are a number of things you can do at this point. So I usually start with triangulating, using shared matches, or as FTDNA calls it, the in common with tools. So I use a number of different things to try to figure out how different people are related to each other. So what kind of clues can we get from triangulating? If you're not familiar with that, triangulating is just like it sounds, a triangle with 3 points or 3 angles. And if you consider that the tester is 1 and cousin M is the second, the third person in that list is the person who matches the 2 of them. So it's a tool we use to filter our lists. Instead of having 10,000 matches, then we can narrow it down to the people who only match the tester and cousin M and have a much smaller list of people to work with. So we can learn a lot from triangulating. If you have one or both of the tester's parents, you can likely figure out mom's side or dad's side if there's no endogamy or pedigree collapse. Now, endogamy and pedigree collapse, if you're new, is something that happens in isolated populations. That's typically called endogamy. Pedigree collapse can happen at any point where 2 closer related people have children together. And so you can have pedigree collapse over and over in different places, or you have endogamy, which is generally a population thing. So we'll probably do some talks about that in upcoming months, but I just want to kind of note it there for those who know what those terms mean. But generally, if you have mom's kit or it's dad's kit, you can use that to sort. If there's a possibility of an MPE, which we call a misattributed parentage event, sometimes we call it not the parent we expected, the oops factor, you might be able to figure out where the broken line is. And remember, negative results are just as valuable as positive results. This is science. And in science, we don't just set aside things as not relevant. We evaluate all the evidence. And having someone as a match can be just as informative as not having someone as a match. And I'll show you that in the shared matches in a few minutes. But it is important to just remember that negative results and positive results, so the confirming what you think or the match to the test versus not the match to the test versus not confirming what you think. Those are all valuable things to keep in mind. And again, on your research report or your running dialogue to yourself, you're going to want to write down what those assumptions are, hypotheses, and conclusions, and what your results show. That's going to help you piece together faster than probably anything else. So when we looked at the shared matches with the tester and with cousin M, the shared match tool in Ancestry is fantastic. And what it will do is it will pare down your list based on cousin M and the people that share matches with her. What do you notice right on the top of this list? That dad is there. The tester's dad is there, not the tester's mom. So all of a sudden, you know what side of the family cousin M is matching. Now you want to be careful with your assumptions. A first cousin only matching dad is highly, highly important. A second cousin or even a third cousin. But once you get beyond that, you might actually see mom and dad show up on the list. And sometimes that happens, but your third or fourth cousins, you don't always share the same DNA with your other third and fourth cousins. So there might be an endogamy situation, pedigree collapse, a smaller community. So there's a number of different reasons why that happened. But the closer the matches, cousin M came in as first cousin, this really is indicative that it's dad's side. You can also see here that cousin M matches the tester's daughter and son, the tester's sister and brother. And then we get to the who are these people? So pretty soon we start to find a number of names that we don't know who they are. You can probably real briefly look here and see no family tree, 47 people, 28 people. You know, maybe they're new to genealogy. Maybe they do know a lot about their family. They just don't have very much online. So there's a lot of different reasons. And again, this was an old screenshot. So no family tree might actually mean no linked tree. Right now, the site would say that there's a linked tree. So none of this made sense to me. The tester thought that she knew all of her first cousins. She grew up with them. And so she thought she knew all of them. Of course, none of us can be absolutely certain that we know all of our first cousins. There always could be some surprises out there. So who could this cousin be? So if cousin M's related to the tester's dad, siblings, and children, then cousin M could have common grandparents or one or both grandparents to the tester. So cousin M would be related to the tester's dad's matches with her grandfather or grandmother or both. So think about that for a minute. If cousin M is related to tester's dad, then she would likely be a descendant of dad's mother or dad's father or both. So again, that drawing of the family tree is going to be so helpful in looking at how did cousin M possibly end up being a first cousin to the tester. So there's even more mysteries that happen because cousin M matches the tester's dad, but cousin M does not match dad's sister's known children. Remember there was that set of 3 first cousins on dad's side? They don't match cousin M. They're not on the shared match list. So when I mentioned a little bit ago that positive and negative results are just as informative and just as important, knowing that there are people, I'll go back a slide, there are people here who match cousin M and dad, including all of these known family members and these unknown cousins. There also are a missing group of people, those 3 first cousins who are related to dad through his sister, who are not here. That is a very crucial piece to solving this mystery. So how can this be? Now, I don't know about you, but I ask myself that question a lot with DNA. I'm thinking, what on earth? How can this be? So if cousin M's related to dad, and one or both of his parents, why isn't cousin M related to dad's sister's children? And I realize this is a lot of intricacy in relationships, but I'm going to put it in a chart in a minute, and that might help you sort it out a little bit. So let's see how cousin M is possibly related to dad. So cousin M is more closely related to dad than to the tester. So we're going to put cousin M and dad into the shared centimorgan project. So you can see here cousin M and the tester's dad have 1,408 centimorgans in common. That's a lot. And the total match is almost 19% match. So when we do that, the relationships that show up is this set of relationships for cousin M compared to dad. Now, if I would not have done the shared matching and had mom and dad's kits for the tester, I wouldn't have known whether it was mom's side or dad's side necessarily. But fortunately, I had both. And so now I'm comparing her to dad. So now it's time for hypotheses. So just a little reminder about science. Confirmation bias can happen. Blaine Bettinger talks about this a lot in his talks. He talks about it in almost every talk I've seen in the last year or so. Confirmation bias is really as simple as, I think I know what the answer is. I'm going to set out to confirm my hypothesis, rather than taking a couple steps back and saying, I have a guess of what this could be, but I am not certain, and so I'm going to evaluate all the evidence. Those are completely different things. And a lot of people have confirmation bias. We see it all the time in news and politics and anything where we take in information. Our confirmation bias really plays a role in how we evaluate that information. Remember, a hypothesis is not a conclusion. So we want to be really careful that our hypothesis is not thrown out there as absolute. We also talked about ruling things out negative. It's just as important as adding things in positive. And science does not only accept evidence that supports a predetermined conclusion. So keep in mind as you're going through this, it's not necessarily that we want to just keep the evidence that works for us and for our hypothesis and throw out the rest. There are lots of different resources on this with genetic genealogy, but also with our genealogical pursuits. How do we evaluate evidence? How do we compile all those different sources and evaluate? And so that's not a new thing for us as genealogists, but we do need to take care when we're looking at things in terms of DNA. Part of the reason for that is that some of this is high stakes. If we discover that someone's adopted, someone has a sperm donor as a father, a biofather, some has an unknown grandparent, those are all potentially sensitive topics. And so we really want to be extra sure that we're not taking that hypothesis and turning it into a conclusion, certainly not way too soon. That's something we need to really fight against. Everybody likes to think that they're right. So this is the time where this is where my brain kind of kicks in and looks at different combinations, permutations, and logic. Now, some of you are more artsy and some of you are more math and science minded, but I use a chart every time I do something like this. So I've searched Google and Facebook. I found that this cousin, I think, my hypothesis is that this is the right person, was born in 1954. And that aligns to the people in her tree and the people in her family and their trees and how I've started to kind of put together those common surnames. So I've looked at the possible DNA relationships to the tester's dad. And if cousin M is 64 and dad is 78, here's where I'm going to focus my investigation on these three in the middle. There's actually 5 relationships there. So I'm not really going to consider that she is the tester's dad's grandmother or great-grandmother. I'm also not going to consider that, born 14 years apart, that she's not dad's grandchild or great-grandchild. So I'm going to focus on these in the middle. Now, I will tell you, having done this for a while, sometimes I have to go back and revisit my assumptions. But that's why I have the chart, so that I can go back and say, you know what, I was assuming this wasn't a grandchild, but maybe she is, if I've kind of done some exhaustive research on the other options. So I'm going to focus in on aunt, half sibling, niece, and half niece from that highlighted chart. So this is my next chart that I make. So I've got aunt or half aunt, and I do for this to be true. Half sibling for this to be true. And niece or half niece for this to be true. So I have started gathering information. I've talked to the tester's dad. Again, I had no correspondence from any of these matches at all. So I'm piecing together their family trees. I'm looking at all of those matches who are on the shared match list and how do they fit in with each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but I want to go through this for a second. So aunt or half aunt, let's look at the top one up here. For this to be true, for cousin M, this first cousin that's in the tester's list, for her to be dad's aunt or half aunt, then one of dad's grandparents would have had a child. But all of dad's grandparents were deceased in 1954 when she was born. So we can pretty safely assume that once they're deceased, they're not having children. And so we can rule out the aunt, half aunt at this point. Again, we might have to come back and revisit. Maybe that date's not right. Maybe somebody's still alive we don't know about and young enough to have children. You never know. So you might have to come back. For her to be, cousin M, to be a half sibling to dad, then either dad's mom had a child or dad's dad had a child. So dad's dad had a child at 50 years old, and the tester's dad and his sister have different fathers, or dad's mom had a child when she was 51 years old, and dad and his sister have different fathers. What you might notice about that is that the conclusion for both is that mom and his sister have different fathers, given the fact that that first set of first cousins, the three first cousins of dad's sister, weren't matches to cousin M. So if dad's dad had a child, then dad and his sister have different fathers, or if dad's mom had a child, dad and his sister have different fathers. That's also a conclusion. So that, again, we might have to revisit, but that's what I'm starting with. We also have the possibility of niece and half niece. And for this to be true, maybe one of dad's sisters had an unknown child. So the tester's dad had two sisters. So the first sister is the one that has the three children who don't match cousin M. So sister A can't be the mother. And you might have to rewatch this a couple times to piece together the relationships, or maybe in the next chart, look at the diagram. That might help. There is a second sister who is deceased. She didn't have any biological children until she was in her 40s. In 1954, when cousin M was born, she was 25, but she was married and she was already adopting 3 children. So it seems unlikely that in those years she would have given up 1 child just to go on and adopt 3 more, thinking that she couldn't have children, or at least telling people she couldn't have children. So there are a couple of things here that I've outlined as some possibilities. And again, there are many, many more possibilities. We'll come back to that in a minute, but that's where I started. Remember, with science, we start with a best guess, we start with a hypothesis, and we see if any of that bears out. So here's the diagram for those of you who are visual. So we have the tester, we have tester's dad. Remember, we have mom, but the tester didn't match mom. The tester, cousin M matched the tester's brother and sister. Also, the possibilities we had on our chart were aunt or half-aunt, half-sibling, niece or half-niece. So that's where we're starting with the family tree that we've already kind of put together, given the known kits that we have. So let's look at the trees of cousin M and those mystery second cousins. And I'm going to use just a surname that I made up called Bird. It's not the actual surname of anyone involved. It's just I don't know why I came up with that, but cousin M and the 3 second cousin matches that I found initially have a common name of Bird in the family tree, and they were in Ohio. And Ohio makes a lot of sense, given the fact that I was working with this tester in Ohio, and she lives in Ohio, and so does most of her family. So it made a lot of sense that Ohio came up pretty soon after we started the discussions. So did this man of Bird, one of these bird men, have a relationship with the tester's grandmother that resulted in another child? But remember, the tester's grandmother raised her father and 2 sisters, and they didn't know anything about this other child. So Mr. Bird would have taken that child with him and raised the child with someone else. That is a possibility. People say all the time, well, wouldn't the children of grandmother know if she had another child that she gave away? And I will say at the time of cousin M's birth, the tester's father was 14. I don't think 14-year-old boys necessarily notice very much. So it's possibility that, that his mother was pregnant and he was unaware. So that, I mean, that could have happened. The 2 sisters were much older. So they were already out of the house and married and having children. Is Mr. Bird possibly the father of Dad's sister's child? And we looked at those possibilities, but again, Mr. Bird would have taken that child with him and raised the child with someone else. So if cousin M was one of the tester's father's sister's children, that would have been difficult to hide, because there would have been a lot of people around who would have noticed that, I think. So we're going to work this set of options. We're going to build trees. We're going to look at centimorgan values and relationships, and we're going to try to connect the matches trees to the other. This is key. We are going to build other people's trees to solve the mysteries. So if you have a mystery person in your tree and you can do the shared matching between you and that person and come up with the shared match list, or between your father or your mother and that person and come up with a shared match list, you're going to connect all those trees to the other. So at the time that this mystery started, I believe there were 5 or 6 trees I started with working on, 5 or 6 matches, making trees for each of those people. Remember, some of those matches had no tree at all. Some of them had 3 or 4 people. A couple of them had 20 or 30 people in their trees. So I don't necessarily rely on what they have. I did look to see if there were common names, but I'm trying to piece them together. And what I do is I have a piece of paper for each person. And as I figure out how one person is related to another, I tape them together, like old school, like Scotch tape and paper, until I really think the tree starts to come together. I'm not normally doing this online at Ancestry. I'm not normally doing it like in Family Tree or Roots Magic or any of the software, until I have a pretty well-formed plan. I'm generally drawing and scribbling on pieces of paper and connecting them all together, and then taping them to the wall in my living room while I sort it out. My husband's very understanding. So sometimes I have to revise my hypothesis. So what else could explain some of these relationships? Remember, DNA doesn't lie, but there are weird things that happen, and sometimes our analysis can be flawed. So we want to make sure that we have excluded things, that we've included everything. And when I say excluded things, we've ruled out some of our hypotheses and that sort of thing. We don't want to exclude data or matches. But there are some weird things that happen. But what I did, my first round of conclusions was that the tester's dad was 14 years old, and this was not his daughter. There aren't enough centimorgans for cousin M to be the tester's dad's daughter. If they were a daughter and father match, they would be in the 35 to 3,600 centimorgan range. So there's not enough centimorgans for that. You also always have to think about the fact that someone might be a bone marrow donor. It's not a common thing, but if someone is a recipient of bone marrow, they can have the genetic line of the person who is the donor. Again, it's extremely rare. And Blaine Bettinger has a pretty common phrase that he says, you know, sometimes a horse is a horse, not a zebra. And so sometimes we chase some of these very, very low rate of incidence answers. But it is something, you know, when you're looking at your hypothesis, you're trying to sort it out. Bone marrow recipients can have some issues there. Maybe there's a parent, father who's a sperm donor. I know it's going to mess with us over the years, upcoming years, that sperm can be saved for 40 or 50 years and then used. So that's going to really mess with some people's trees, I think, in the future. But just something to think about. It's not common. In 1954, it was not known to be a sperm donation situation. I think the first sperm clinics weren't until the 70s on the coast. So what if someone's an identical twin, though? That is something that you need to think about. Most of us, unless we have identical twins, don't necessarily think about the identical twin or triplet situation. But let me just give you an example. I do have identical twins. They're 32 years old. They're identical boys. One of them has a son, and he's 2, but I've not DNA tested my grandson. I don't think ethically that anyone under 18 should be tested. I know other people feel differently about that, but I do not, not testing my grandson. But if my grandson did a DNA test, he would show up as a match, a parent-child match to both his father and his father's identical twin, his uncle. Because Ancestry or any other tool is not going to be able to differentiate between the 2 identical boys, which one is his father. So my grandson would actually have 2 men and his mother in parent-child relationships on his DNA chart. So we always have to be thinking at least a little bit in the background that there could be an identical twin or triplet or something that throws a wrench in this. So let's say, for example, the tester's father's sister, one of the sisters was an identical twin. You know, back in the 40s and 50s, during childbirth, a lot of times women were sedated or knocked out. My mom says knocked out. Actually, my mom says knocked up and knocked out. But when women were knocked out, I mean, sometimes they did deliver more than one child and did not know it. And there were times, and I've worked a case where one of those twins was handed off to another family and adopted out, and the mother never knew, and the father's in the waiting room. So there are some strange things that happen. I'm not saying again that that's a common thing. It's just something to consider. And is it possible that there's a double cousin or endogamy or something that makes that match of cousin M and dad closer than it appears? So those are all things we'll talk about a little bit in upcoming sessions. And we always have to consider, are there other relationships that we haven't really fully investigated? Because you noticed I took that great chart from DNA Painter's Shared Centimorgan project, and I focused just on the logical likely center, didn't necessarily focus on all the other parts of that chart. So there are more things to investigate. So remember, DNA alone doesn't prove anything. Remember, my son and his son, you wouldn't know which one's the father of the identical twins. Also, the testing company just tells you that there's a parent-child relationship. It doesn't even tell you which is the parent and which is the child. So those are some things to remember when you're looking at your match list. DNA is one piece of the puzzle. Just like a marriage record or a census doesn't prove parentage, DNA is one piece of the puzzle and should be used in tandem with other genealogical sources. There's a reason why DNA interest groups and a lot of those kinds of investigative groups are housed within genealogical societies, because you still need records and documents. Just like other genealogical sources, DNA needs corroborated with other evidence. And segment analysis really is essential, especially if you have very few matches and you're trying to draw conclusions. And just because you have names in your tree and a DNA match doesn't mean that that surname or line is the source of the segment in common. So just because there are birds in one tree and birds in another tree doesn't mean that the families are linked together because of bird DNA. So that's a really important thing to remember. The name is corroborative evidence, but it's not exclusive evidence. And also, don't forget, your tree could be wrong. I know no one wants to ever hear that their tree is wrong. It's always everyone else's tree that's wrong, but your tree could be wrong. So just want to keep that in mind. So what other options could there be? So when I usually talk about this with groups, I put the chart back up again. We had those 5 relationships we were looking at for the tester and the tester's dad and cousin M. So we had sort of narrowed it down using logic to aunt, half sibling, niece, and half niece. So what other options could there be? Now, I'm not going to leave you here thinking too much about this, but this is the point where sometimes I start over again with the chart. If I've kind of run up against a dead end or brick wall, I'm going to start over with the chart and think about some other options. So the reality of it is we wait. We work on family trees for this bird family and other matches. We're searching records, genealogical sources of the bird family. Remember, the last census that we have is 1940. So if you're talking about a first cousin match, you can find things in the 1940 census and the 1930 and 20 census that are relevant to this. The further away the match is, the further back it goes. So that you can find a lot of genealogical sources. We message people. I spend a lot of time messaging people through Ancestry's tools or 23andMe's tools. We look at our matches at other sites. Don't forget, this was a mystery at Ancestry, but this tester has other DNA test kits at other companies. So work on those other matches, search those other sites for that bird surname. There are a lot of different tools you can use at the other sites. And if you're new to this, you might be wondering, why do I want to test at another site? Well, this is exactly one reason. And if you're working on an adoption or an unknown parent or grandparent, as many databases as you can be in, the better. Make sure that you read the terms of service. Make sure you understand the law enforcement, subpoena, all of those kind of areas. When you're testing somewhere, make sure you read that. I know most of us just skip that and we just say, okay, okay, okay. But remember, this is DNA data. We also want to look for the other degree 4 relationships, and don't forget the half relationships. So we might have to go back and visit that tree again. So just to give you the timeline, 7 months later, so with this question, the tester and I, we got to a point where we're like, well, we kind of need a breakthrough. We've built all the trees, we've done the sleuthing, we've looked at all the possible relationships, we've ruled a lot of things out, but we're kind of at a dead end. 7 months later, just to give you the timeline, I had a new set of matches show up at 23andMe who matched the tester. And the new set of matches that showed up at 23andMe were a mother and son match to the tester. Now the tester's dad's kit is not there, so it's just the tester. And the match was a confirmed member of the bird family and willing to help. Now when I say I gave her an out, I really did give her an out. In my correspondence with her, I said, look, I'm working on this mystery. I'm not sure what's going on. I think there's a misattributed parentage. I don't know which side of the family it's on. I don't know a whole lot. I've built a lot of trees. I have some thoughts. I said, do you want to know? And this is kind of the general message that I sent to her. Do you want to know? Because I think that people actually do have the right not to know if that's their decision. And so she said to me, I don't want to know, bye-bye. Then I would have been fine with that. And I would have just used that match to the tester at 23andMe and tried to figure out how she fit in. But she was willing to help. And in talking to her and working with her, we narrowed it down to 2 men in the Bird family who are related to this cousin M. So these are the new hypotheses that we came up with. The tester's new match at 23andMe thought that dad's father was her uncle. And the new tester, the theory was that dad's father was her grandfather. So that was one theory. And we exchanged pictures so that we could look and see is there any family resemblance? Now that's anecdotal evidence, but it's also interesting. We both agreed to some stipulations, and again, this goes back to ethics and privacy. We both agreed to stipulations as we figure this out. We were going to use confidentiality and pseudonyms for everyone involved. So as I was talking to her and she was talking to me, we agreed what we would keep to ourselves. We also decided that I would tell the tester and her father what the results were. She would tell her mother what the results were, and neither of us would cross over into telling each other's people anything about this. So I'm not going to reach out to her family. She's not going to reach out to the tester's family. And we kind of drew a line there so that I and the tester and I could manage her people, and this 23andMe match could manage her people. And I think that was really crucial to kind of building trust between us so that we could work out the problem and the situation without inadvertently having big powwows and lots of other people chiming in. We really just kept it low key. All the evidence really supported my conclusion. And let me go back and show you this again, this previous slide. My theory was that the tester's dad's father was her grandfather, this tester at 20, or I'm sorry, was cousin M's grandfather. That was my thought. The theory was that dad's father was cousin M's grandfather. So that would make cousin M dad's niece. So let's go through this. This is the evidence that supported my conclusion. And this is pretty close to the end. So I just want to kind of wrap up with, I looked at census records from 1940 and back. I looked at city directories from the town where the tester's grandmother lived. I also looked at city directories where the Bird family lived. Oftentimes, city directories have occupations listed. That's very helpful. I looked at newspaper records. I actually found a tremendous amount of newspaper records on the Bird family. And in particular, the 2 men that I was suspicious of, the suspects, shall we say. The World War II draft registration cards have physical descriptions of men. So if you're looking for any sort of key evidence about who potentially could be the father of someone, sometimes the physical description is very telling. What we eventually figured out is that one of the Bird men lived 2 blocks from the tester's grandmother in 1939, and he was the school superintendent and grandma was a teacher. And so in order to prove this, it took a lot of building trees for other people. I did all of that with no help until this last match came into the tester from 23andMe. And she's the one who helped me kind of seal the deal for what I already was suspicious of. So let's look at a couple of things here. I was able to take 16 mini trees of matches at 3 different testing companies and build one tree of all of these matches and how they fit in with the tester and the tester's dad. How many shared centimorgans they had with dad, how many shared centimorgans they had with the tester, and I confirmed that each person in the visual tree fell within the shared centimorgan range for those relationships. So as I'm figuring out who people are and adding them to the tree, I'm also writing down the centimorgans they have in common and looking to make sure that those people are at the right generation. It's usually a difference of generation that I find, but I'm looking to make sure that I have everyone in the right place. I was able to do some segment analysis with the 23andMe matches, the FTDNA matches, and GEDmatch matches to confirm some shared segments. So those of you who are new to this, we'll talk in some upcoming months about how you can use some of those tools, the chromosome browsers, spreadsheets, and that sort of thing to confirm shared segments. Also, what I discovered for the tester was that the GEDmatch matches that had been pending and unsolved for a long time were because of this unknown grandparent. If the tester had an unknown grandparent and not the grandparent she thought, it lent new evidence to her pending questions. So when I say that I have a research report for every single question that I have, there were piles of research reports for these other GEDmatch matches. People would reach out to this tester and she would say to me, I don't know who these people are, and I can't figure out how they're related to me. And once we were able to determine that there was some misattributed parentage, we were able to clear all those GEDmatch matches that were actually related to her, and we didn't know how. 9 months later, this is 9 months after the first cousin shows up as a surprise in the tree. The rest of the story is that here's the tester and dad. There was a pretty strong hypothesis that dad's father wasn't the father he thought, and that he and his sister, at least one sister, had different fathers. That is actually true. Through further DNA testing, proved that. Dad's bio father over here had a son who was a half brother to dad, who had a daughter, which is cousin M. So this is the tester's dad's half niece, and that falls into one of those categories to be a first cousin match at Ancestry. I'll put this back up in a minute, but I want to do the conclusions real quick. The conclusions, and again, at the end of these kind of things, I generally write the list of conclusions in case more evidence comes in, if I need to come back and look at something. Or let's say, for example, one of those 16 people someday contacts the tester and says, hey, how did you figure this out? There would be a written record of that. So dad has a different biological father than at least one sister. We don't know yet if dad has a different biological father than the second sister, because none of the biological children of the second sister have tested. So that's a potential next step. Let's figure out if there are 2 dads involved or 3. So that's a possibility. Dad's father was not the father he grew up knowing. There's no evidence that anyone knew this except grandma. Grandma kept the secret. So grandma was the teacher. The father of her child was the school superintendent. I don't know that it's safe to assume that it was an affair or consensual. I don't know that we know that, but it seems like that's a possibility. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't think about is that now 25% of the tester's family tree is incorrect, so that she has a grandfather in the wrong place and needs to insert a new grandfather in the tree. And again, that's another ethical thing. So what if your tree is public and you put your new grandpa in the tree, and what's the ramification of that? So we always need to be thinking about that. So now that you know the secret, you want to plan your next move carefully, because there's no undo button for it. You know that old expression about the cat being out of the bag. So you want to make sure that you tread carefully and thoughtfully and purposefully. Do the parties involved want to know? So I look at those 16 trees and matches that came in as shared matches, and none of them have ever corresponded. So they don't know. Do you tell this group of 16 people, or do you wait for them to come to you? So I could follow up and send a match to each of those people and say, hey, did you know that, whatever I know about it, your grandpa's not your grandpa, your, dad's not your dad, whatever the case may be. Um, did you know that your grandfather had other children you didn't know about? So those are all things that I generally will just wait, and I will not be the person who is carrying the tale. Also, whose story is it to tell? In this case, the tester might have a story to tell here. The tester's father clearly should weigh in on that, whether or not it's a story that he wants told. And so there's all kinds of privacy issues, ethical concerns. And, I will say that having talked to the tester's father, he actually, you might wonder what his response was. He was actually relieved that the dad he grew up with wasn't his dad. They never really got along very well. And all he said was, boy, that explains a lot. And so you never know what someone's reaction is going to be. And, they might be devastated. They might be relieved. They might be confused. They might not understand the science. They might not understand the analysis. So tread carefully, think about whose story it is to tell, and always be thinking about the privacy issues and ethical concerns that people might have. I'm going to stop the recording so that we can discuss anything else that anyone wants to talk about, because I don't want to inadvertently say something on the recording that shouldn't be. So give me just 1 second here. All right.